The Black Plague. Good evening, everybody. This is the Gabby Mac Project. Somewhere it's 6 o'clock. Okay, tonight's topic is a serious one. We're going to talk about black on black violence. Now, it comes in vogue sometimes and then it fades away. Now, what I'm about to say may sound harsh. And to the weak, it might seem a bit over the top. But damn it, we got to start calling a spade a spade. So, when I talk about black violence, I put it into 3 categories. It's either acts of genocide, fratricide, or cannibalism. Now, it doesn't matter to me which one is more prevalent in a particular neighborhood, but it is what it is. And they are a plague on the black community. Now, I need you to hang in there with me as I build my case for my thesis. Now, let's start with genocide, shall we? Now, genocide means when you deliberately kill a large number of people from a particular nation or ethnic group with the aim of destroying that group. That's called genocide. Now, anyone with eyes can see that's what's been happening in the black community for generations. We're just doing it at a slower pace. Can any one of you say with a straight face that the definition doesn't describe what has been happening in the black community? Listen to me. We as a whole account for 15 to 20% of the U.S. population. But in our communities, we account for 97% of the people that are murdered by someone who looks just like them every year. Just consider the so-called turf battles in inner cities where gang members battle each other for territory from which to sell drugs and commit other illicit activities. The result has been the death of thousands of other people. Now, those that are killed, let's call it what it is. Those that are murdered means that thousands of victims will never grow up into adulthood. Now, if you're one of the quote-unquote lucky ones that survive, you're maimed so badly that you're either confined to a wheelchair for the rest of your life, or you have to piss and shit through a colosophy bag until you die. And sometimes they can't take the bullet out, so you walk around with that for the rest of your life. It's graphic, but it's the real world we live in. Now, people always think about genocide as it relates to what happened to the Jewish people during World War II. But the pure definition is what I said before. The deliberate killing of people from a particular group or ethnic environment. Now, I would argue that taking thousands of lives, black people lives, is tantamount to acts of genocide. I mean, thousands of lives are being snuffed out each year. Us murdering each other. Now, when people say the word fratricide, which is a very difficult word to say, the meaning is very simple. It means killing, or should I say murdering, your own brother or your sister or someone from the same group. That's what homeboys and gang members do to each other every night of the week. Point made. Now, when we talk about this last one, it brings back images of black cannibalism, us running through the jungles, putting each other in pots and boiling the heads and et cetera, et cetera. Something like the old Tarzan movies. However, in modern times, instead of people eating each other, cannibalism's definition has been expanded to include such things as quote-unquote crimes against humanity, quote-unquote dehumanization, and quote-unquote extrajudicial punishment. Now, you can't convince me that selling drugs to your own people, engaging in turf battles to control illicit activities in inner cities is not a crime against humanity. So, when somebody engages in a drive-by shooting, taking the law into your own hands and handling that punishment without the benefit of a trial, this so-called street justice is the most extreme example of extrajudicial punishment. I may stand alone. I got pretty good shoulders. And the ideas I put forth may not be popular. But sometimes you have to call it for what it is. Others may differ. It's America. You can do that. But it's not just happening in black communities. Or should I say big cities. The quote-unquote urban areas that they like to talk about. What they really mean is black areas. Now, these acts of savagery are also spreading to small towns and even rural areas. So that's why I think these three terms accurately describe what is happening in too many black communities. Even in the outback areas, you hear about cars passing through the streets and randomly shooting to crowds. I believe it's time to stop pussyfooting around and call it what it really is. Acts of savagery. Now, everybody knows that savagery didn't start last week, last month, last year. It's been evolving since the 1970s. And what I'm about to say is probably not going to be popular, but that's why I'm Gabby Mack. I can say that. I think a lion's share of that mayhem rests on the shoulders of black women. Whoa, you may say. Okay. Now, I say that because that's when black women start letting the government replace black men in the homes. I'm talking about those black women who signed up for those government programs and guaranteed monthly checks. And you know what the result has been? Let me tell you. 50 years of children growing up without fathers being there to provide the necessary guidance and the sometimes hands of steel, especially to the boys. Now, back then, the Great Society and its social programs were supposed to uplift the black community, but it had an adverse effect. You see, some of the programs actually encouraged the splitting up of black families. My. Now, bear with me, because context matters. You see, in the 70s, there was the beginning of what they call the deindustrialization of America. You see, before that, many black men could get good, high-paying jobs working in factories and such. But with the deindustrialization of America, most of those jobs are sent to Asian countries where semi-skilled labor was dirt cheap. Now, many black men bore the brunt of job losses. And this was particularly true in the quote-unquote urban cities. You see, that's where a lot of black men lived. Now, you see, Uncle Sam saw this and decided to step in and help us, to save us. Now, I don't know how they got it wrong, but instead of instituting policies to keep black families together, the stipulation they added did the exact opposite. The exact opposite. You see, men were not allowed to stay in the house or apartment if the family received assistance. So you see, black women had a choice to make. Keep families together or sign up for government assistance and receive a guaranteed check every month. They chose the checks, many of them. So That decision pretty much disenfranchised black men from their homes. And 50 years later, let me tell you what the result has been. 50 years of children growing up without fathers in the home, there to provide that guidance and that steel hand if necessary. Now, when you talk about the high incarceration rate among black people, you have to remember that a man without a job to support his family feels worthless. And feeling worthless brings out the absolute worst in people, including black people. Some men turned to drugs. Others fell into the drug culture just to numb themselves against the reality of their lives of shame and the inability to provide for their families. Some of those men turned to selling drugs themselves. Now, what do you think was going to happen? The black prison population increased dramatically. That's a no-brainer. And now, without the father in the home, what do you think happened to the children? What do you think happened to the children? You see, young men either followed in their father's footsteps, or worse yet, turned to the streets for a sense of belonging to something bigger than themselves. And turning to the streets meant possessing a gun as a sign of their manhood. And a gun in the hand of someone without a moral code is a dangerous thing. So shooting, killing, or maiming another human being over the slightest indignation becomes the norm. How do you say that? My. And the young girls, look at what happened to some of them. Well, that is when the surge in out-of-wedlock birth began to rise. I mean, what frame of reference did she have? She wasn't used to seeing a nuclear family. A mother and a father in the same household was like a unicorn to her. So, she searched for love in all the wrong places. And unresponsible boys and men took advantage of her naivety. And boom, a baby is born. Nowadays, that's been normalized. Today, out-of-wedlock birth stand at over 70%. That's an enormous number of children being born today in households that are led by women. My. But we don't have to do a sociological study of the last 70 years or 50 years or 60 years. All we have to do is examine the last 5 years. Because let's just look at the last 5 years. Blacks murdered each other to the total of 12,500 of their brethren. That's right. And if you average that out, it comes out to 2,500 per year. And you know what that total represents? Well, let me tell you, 2,500 every year over 5 years, 12,500. Now, sometime when you quote numbers and statistics, people's eyes glaze over. So let's put the numbers in context, shall we? Just think about it. Those 12,500 black people would be enough people to populate the average town in America. Because you see, there are roughly 16,000 towns with populations less than 10,000 people. Just think about that for a moment. Any one of those towns, from the East Coast to the West Coast, from the North to the South, could be filled by those 12,500 murdered black people and equal that population. And you know what we never talk about? We never talk about the collateral damage these murderers wrought on our communities. I'm talking about the effect these deaths had on the ones left behind. The fathers, the mothers, the aunts and uncles, sisters and brothers, and worst of all, the children. You see, these children are now orphans because one of their parents or both of their parents are no longer in their lives. Think about the suffering that those people must go through when they lose a child. It's got to be unimaginable pain and suffering. John Henry didn't have another birthday. Jane, Paul, and Harry are not going to be at the annual picnic. Carol, Jane, Jeremiah not going to be at the high school graduation. Peter, James, Nathaniel not going to be there. Not going to be there. Okay. So it's time for us to stand up and call it what it is, people. Acts of savagery. And these acts of savagery are most likely being carried out by young black males. How can anyone just ride through a neighborhood or shoot up a party? Whether you hit your intended victim or not, the collateral damage, bullets, they don't have any laser beam on them. Now, I bet a lot of these young men came from households headed by single mothers. I sincerely believe that. And I sincerely believe that had a man been in the household, we would reduce the number of murders in our black community. Because I truly believe, deep down inside, that most fathers, not all, would teach their sons how to de-escalate an incident so that every dispute, every argument, and every fist fight does not result in gun battles. Just this past weekend, I was reading the local paper. 6 people got killed. Some were at parties, some were in other incidents. And that's just one of those 16,000 municipalities in America. Multiply that times 16,000. Now, we can't keep sugarcoating what's been going on. We all know that there's a group of black people who are a malignancy on our communities. Now, you can try to wish it away all you want, but it is what it is. We have lived through this reality since the 1970s. And that equates to 5 generations of men not being present to bring up their damn sons. We lost 5 generations who became directionless young men out in the streets. And the mothers, clueless. Some of them are babes themselves. They don't know what bringing up a child is. And sadly, a lot of them are still trying to get their swirl on out in the streets themselves. So what happened? The child ends up being raised by aging grandparents. You know, a few months ago, I did a video about minstrel shows. And their effect on the perception of black people during the 1820s and beyond. Now, if you didn't know what these were, minstrel shows were entertainment where white actors put on blackface and portrayed us in the most demeaning characteristics imaginable. That's where the Sambos, the Jezebels, the Uncle Tom, Mandingos, etc. came into existence. Now, they would put on shows across America that portrayed us as being lazy, buffoonish, couldn't speak the English language. But why should we? Because it wasn't our native tongue. But anyway, they said, portrayed us as having low moral character, and stated unequivocally that we were uncivilizable. My question to you is, are we proving them right? Are we proving them right? You know, us in the black community, we make a lot of noise when a police officer kills a black person, and rightfully so. You know, we march in the streets protesting the injustice, rightly or wrongly. But you know what? I don't hear that relentless call for justice for the dead black people killed by other black people. It's just another day at the office. Very little is done when we killed each other. I don't see that sustained marching, the nightly vigils when us killing each other. And you know what? They just say, that's just one less black person I have to deal with. Now, here's a little Philosopher King story time. But it's a true story. Most of you will never experience that, and that's really, really good. Have you ever seen what a bullet does when it hits the body? I can tell you from personal experience. It's a devastating, gruesome, and needless to say, traumatic experience. It is a sight to behold. You see, the bullet goes in, and it creates a small entry area. But man, oh man, the damage that projectile causes inside the body. Now, if you're lucky, the projectile, i.e. bullet, goes through soft tissue and exits without causing a lot of collateral damage. If you're lucky. Most times that's not the case. You see, when a projectile goes in normally, it starts to hit on other organs inside the body. Now let me make this personal for you. You see, my first exposure to gun violence occurred when I was in my young teens. You see, I was the eldest son. So, with that came certain responsibilities. Now, on one particular day, I was told that I had to go to town because something terrible had happened to one of my uncles. So, when I arrived, I saw my uncle in the middle of the street, dead, lying in his own blood. And people, it's not like TV. You don't get up to make another show. You see, when you are shot, the blood starts to ooze from the opening closed by the wound. And the blood doesn't stay red because when it hits the air, it starts to turn purplish. Now, as I approached the body, it was devastating to see someone that I loved in that crumpled up, motionless, never to laugh or smile or tell another joke. Now, see, even in the military, when you kill someone, it can affect you different ways. Some people never recover. Now, here's Gabby Max 25 cents. I don't have a solution. But I do believe we have to hope that these heathens go the way of the dinosaur. Hopefully they won't produce too many offsprings who will follow in their footprints and keep the cycle going. Now, the reason I say that is because I don't think that people really change that much over time. Who you are at a certain age is who you die as. And as I said earlier, we've already lost 5 generations. If I could, today, it would take 7 generations to make an improvement. I won't be here. 7 generations. 7 generations. Gabby Mack. Oh, you.